All right, so going through again, PPT is shorthand for precipitation, which means a solid forming from a double replacement reaction. If you're using your solubility chart, you would see the letter I for one of your products for the reactions that occur. So we're visually going to see the reactions occurring right now. If in your observations on table 1, so observations, I'm just going to let you know that you should be writing, if a reaction occurs, you write the word PPT. I want you to also include what the color of the PPT is. So if it's a white precipitate, you write white. If it's yellow, you write yellow PPT. And then further on the table, it's going to ask you, does the reaction occur or not? Well, if there is a precipitate, yes, it did occur. If no precipitate occurred, you can use the letters NR, which stands for no reaction, and then you would just put a no. Okay, so I do know obviously which reactions occurred and which didn't. So we will do most of the reactions, but we won't do all of them because there are some of them that just don't react, and so I won't have to do them all. But I do want you to get a visual of what reactions look like when they occur and they don't in a larger quantity than just the one that we saw yesterday. So yesterday's demo, you guys saw one of the reactions occur, and you saw, let me see if I can get this straightened out here. You saw one of them occur and they had a yellow precipitate that formed. So let's get started. All right, so I have barium nitrate. I'm gonna look for barium nitrate in my bottles. I have lots of chemicals here in front of me. Barium nitrate, there we go. It's a clear liquid, aqueous solution. To make things go quicker, I'm just going to put a drop of barium nitrate on my transparency in each of the cells. Like that. And then I'm going to react it with the other chemical. So here it's number 1 on your transparency, number 1, barium nitrate and sodium sulfate. So now I'll get sodium sulfate. It's also a clear liquid. I'll put those two together, 1 drop without contaminating, without touching the tip to the other chemical. And I'll notice as a quick reaction occurs, it's clearly forming a white precipitate. So there is a reaction and it forms a white precipitate. So in your observations for barium nitrate and sodium sulfate, you want to write white precipitate or white PPT and the word yes, the reaction occurred. All right, I'm going to go along and I'm going to show you as we go on. So we'll take aluminum sulfate with barium nitrate. And that was a quick reaction. There is definitely a white precipitate that formed there as well. So note the white precipitate that formed. Now I'll take magnesium nitrate. I need to get my magnesium nitrate. It's a clear liquid as well. I'll drop a drop without contaminating it. Note that there's no reaction occurring there. Nothing happened. Barium nitrate and aluminum chloride. We'll take my aluminum chloride. As long as Mrs. Sulkson can find where she put her aluminum chloride. There we go. I'm going to take 1 drop of that without cross-contaminating it. No reaction occurred. There's no change. So note the white PPT that formed here. There is nothing that occurred here. Magnesium chloride. We'll look for magnesium chloride in the bottles that I brought home. And I'll react that 1 drop. And again, no reaction. So far we've only had 2 react with white precipitates. Barium nitrate and sodium sulfate and barium nitrate and aluminum sulfate are my 2 reactions. I'm going to skip over my sodium sulfate with any of these. I do know that none of these are reactions. So the rest of these with sodium sulfate, there are no reactions. And I'm doing that just so we don't run out of time to show you the rest of the transparencies. So I'm going to move down to transparency 2 now, which on your worksheet or on your CAMI worksheet, it's going to say transparency 2. And I'm going to start with magnesium chloride. So I'll take my magnesium chloride and I will drop magnesium chloride into each of the cells. Since it's going to react with the 3 chemicals on top, I'll take sodium hydroxide, my base, and I will drop 1 drop in there. All right, so unfortunately though, what you don't see and what I see is that we're gonna let that sit a little bit. And unfortunately, I don't think it's gonna get that clear because of the glare on my transparency. But there is a very small amount of white precipitate that forms, and it's right forming in the middle. The longer we let it sit here, the more it's going to form. So for magnesium chloride and sodium hydroxide, there is a reaction. It's a white precipitate. Okay? So let me look at barium chloride. I'll drop my barium chloride. There's no reaction that occurs between my number 9, barium chloride, and magnesium chloride. Let's look at magnesium sulfate. There we go, magnesium sulfate, magnesium chloride. There is no reaction there either, so we're at number 10. So there's a faint reaction of white precipitate for number 8, but there is nothing for 9 and 10. So let's do sodium sulfate now. I'm going to drop that in all the cells so I can see the reaction, if any. 2, 3. And let's put the sodium hydroxide with sodium sulfate. So sodium hydroxide and sodium sulfate, I don't have a reaction, and I don't think there's a box for it either. That was just a reaction because of the way it was set up, but there wasn't actually a box on the transparency on table 1. Let's look at barium chloride with sodium sulfate. So sodium sulfate and barium chloride definitely produced a white precipitate. Very clear. All right, let's look at our magnesium sulfate with our sodium sulfate. Put a drop of that. There's no reaction that occurred, so magnesium sulfate, number 12 on our table, did not react. And I know there's a little contamination on this area, so this is going to be a false positive for sodium and barium chloride. Number 13 is not a reaction that should occur. So I'm going to skip to number 14, which is sodium hydroxide and magnesium. Sodium hydroxide. And magnesium sulfate. And there is a precipitate, that's forming. Let me move my transparency up a little bit more so you can see. Very slight. It's not as prominent as my barium chloride and sodium sulfate. However, there is a reaction that occurred. So number 14 does have a white precipitate. I'm going to move down to our last transparency, our last area, barium chloride. I'm going to put barium chloride in all the cells so I can make the reaction occur. So drop in every cell, every box. Good. And then let's look at magnesium sulfate. Magnesium sulfate and barium chloride. Pretty quick, and there was a white precipitate that reacted. Let's look at magnesium nitrate with my barium chloride. No reaction occurred for barium chloride, magnesium nitrate. Our next one is a yellow liquid. And we're going to be using this second semester, sodium chromate. So it's a yellow liquid and it's producing a yellow precipitate. So there's a reaction and it produced a yellow precipitate. Let's look at aluminum sulfate with my barium chloride. Sulfate. And I'm going to drop 1 drop without contaminating. And there is a reaction. Okay, it's very faint. It's not as prominent, but however, there is precipitate that's forming within. So aluminum sulfate and barium chloride, which we are number 18, forms a white precipitate. Let's look at potassium chromate. We're going to drop a drop here. See what happens. I'm going to move my slide over so you can see it a little better. There is a solid that's forming in the middle of that. I know I'm going to have a little bit of a glare here due to the lighting, but there is a solid that's forming with potassium chromate and barium chloride. Last one is silver nitrate. We used this the other day, yesterday in our demos, and it does stain. Let's see what happens here. Oh, an immediate reaction. So double replacement reaction did occur between sodium nitrate and barium chloride, producing a white precipitate. All right, so far number 15 would be a white precipitate. Number 17 is a white precipitate, or I'm sorry, a yellow precipitate. Number 18 is a white precipitate. Number 19 is a yellow precipitate. And number 20 is a white precipitate. All right, we got a few more to go. Let's do potassium chromate on all these, which is yellow. And you'll notice that I have a shaded area because that is the same chemical. You don't mix the same chemical because that would just be not a reaction that would occur. Let's take my staining silver nitrate and react it with my potassium chromate.